This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. Hello and welcome to this episode of Roots and All. This week's guest is Dr. Simon Poole, founder of Mintopia, a website dedicated to mint, featuring its own online reference library for the different types, the Mintopia. Si holds one of the national collections of mint and holds getting on for 200 different cultivars. From his plastic-free organic nursery, he sells themed collections of mints, and he's passionate and knowledgeable about every aspect of the mentha genera. Impressive given that there's so much more to this plant than mint sauce and mojitos. Just the story of how Si came to amass a collection is interesting, and that's where the interview begins.
So, well, it's complicated, but I do like it. It's full of all sorts of like happy moments, sad moments, all sorts of things, really. But to know the full sort of story, you have to go way back to when I was living in Germany, weirdly. Well, it's not that weird, I suppose, but I was living in Germany. I was a chef, and I was a chef in a Mexican restaurant. And I was only young, but I got really into using fresh and unusual ingredients in my cooking. And that got me into gardening. And because a lot of the things that I wanted to actually use in my cooking, I couldn't actually get hold of. So it was a matter of growing them, you know. So that love of gardening has just stayed with me for 20 odd years now. Oh gosh, it is that long. Yeah. So, and about 5-6 years ago, I lost my dad, and I found getting out in the garden, just pottering about and having a think, you know, it was just such a soothing way of just working out what had happened, because it was really sudden as well. He died of cancer. It was like 3 months or something from, you know, when we got the news to when he actually died. But and I was pottering away in the garden, and I was sitting down on the bench one day looking at a cup of tea, you know, and I was just looking across the garden. We live out in the sticks, out in Cheshire, and I just love my garden so much. But I'm really into perennial edibles. I'm into all sorts of different things. I'm a bit of a species addict, I suppose. And I was looking across the garden with a cup of tea, and I thought, oh, I'm really chuffed with what I've got here, you know, and I feel like I've got a really, really interesting broad array of all sorts of different species, and you know, and the thing for me is I like understanding how plants work, you know. I like to know like what they're into, and like how they grow, and what you know, what they look like even, you know. And I was sort of looking there, sitting there, I thought, I've got loads of stuff. This is really interesting. I've got so many different things, and I know quite a bit, you know, and I know my Latin names and whatnot. But then I thought to myself, but actually, although I've got this broad understanding of sort of horticulture, and, you know, I mean, I suppose I am a bit of a plantsman, really, but I thought to myself, I don't actually know a great deal about one particular species in particular, you know, like really, really deep understanding of one particular species. So I just randomly picked it, really, to be honest, because well, it's not that random, I must admit, but I like mint tea. I've always drunk mint tea. I like cooking with it anyway, but also I'm pretty busy with my other jobs and the different things I do, and I thought, well, if I'm going to do this and, you know, find out as much as I can about one particular family of plants or whatever, or, you know, I need to choose something that's pretty indestructible. There's no point in choosing orchids or something, because I just don't have the time to, you know, to nurture them. So I went with mint, and I suppose the other thing is I wanted something that was functional as well, because I really like things. I like my garden's quite a pottage garden, really. So I like to really grow things that can be used, and also, so I've got a little dyer's garden. I've got, you know, all sorts of different, as I mentioned, perennial edibles and whatnot. But so I went with mint, and it started, I think, within the first year, I'd probably got not many, about 8 or 9 different types. And then as time went on, it just kept on growing and growing. And I found it to be a really therapeutic thing, and certainly helped me get through sort of, the grieving process as well. And I got really interested in horticultural therapy and really what grew from the collection, the collection was this sort of the opportunity to sell it as well, because I realized that it was quite a costly pursuit, actually, trying to keep hold of that many plants and make sure that they're all right. So I started a website, and with a sort of motivation really that it should be really the sales were to look after the collection, and as I say, the sort of tagline, the motivation behind it was growing for well-being, and that's what I've been doing now for, I think it's about 3 or 4 years. So it's a bit weird. It's a convoluted story, isn't it? Well, it's quite all sorts of different angles to it, but I'm really chuffed I did it. I've not looked back really. It's just I've got a good relationship with growing now. I think even stronger one than I ever had.
Yeah, it's funny actually that you say that, because over the last maybe week, I've been having a conversation with myself about that same thing, which is that I know quite a bit about horticulture, and I'm feeling the need to go down a route of specialising. So it's
funny, isn't it?
I do, yeah. It's just funny that you said that at this time. Yeah, but it's I don't know what, like for you, obviously, it was your dad that sparked it. I mean, nothing similar has happened to me to spark it. I don't know. I just felt like, I suppose, that I was kind of had this broad knowledge, and I'm now feeling I need to refine it.
Yeah, that's that. Yeah, that was it. It was a bit of like a learning challenge for me as well. It was just, I wanted to, I don't know. I wanted to be able to say, yeah, I know about that. Like that's something, that people can ask me questions about it and I'll be able to answer something, I don't know, is it a strange pride to have? I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, no, same thing. I think, yeah.
It's funny, isn't it? But the other funny thing about it, actually, that particular thing with regards to my dad. So I've been working with an academic from Canterbury University who helped to visually document the cherry I don't know what it was a national collection of cherry trees, basically. And he got in touch and he bought some mints off me and we've got chatting since. Anyway, it turns out he's kind of collected collectors, and he's been in touch with quite a few different buds that are running national plant collections around the country. And, he said the number of people that he's spoken to, I mean, I'd be making up a number if I said, but it was high, it was like, something like, like 40 out of the 50 or something like that. It was really high number. He said, but the number of people that started collecting after a bereavement was really, it astonished him. He was really surprised by it. And I absolutely knocked me for six when he told me that. I just thought, wow, that's really, but then I thought, the more I reflected on it, the more I thought, well, yeah, I suppose there's something satisfying in the sort of the ordering. It's a way of dealing with the chaos that's left. You've lost someone or something, whatever it might be, whatever kind of turmoil or loss you might have gone through. And the more I think about it in those terms, the more it makes absolute sense that I did. I mean, I didn't do it on purpose. It wasn't a conscious decision, but when I look back now, I think, yeah, actually, I can see how that was, the methodical nature of it, the way that you lose yourself in it. It's a bit like flow theory, if you ever come across that, but it's like, it's kind of, you kind of become sort of zone out a bit, don't you, sometimes when you're pottering around. And it's just, I think it's really, for all these reasons, it's really good for you. But that stat he told me when he, how many people actually started national plant collections as a result of bereavement, I was astonished by that. So there you go. That's what I'm just another bod doing the same old thing. We all stand on the shoulders of giants, don't we?
Yeah, how interesting. Yeah, that's exactly, I think, the conclusion I would have reached. It's kind of that almost, imposing a little bit of order and control where there wasn't some for a while, or, like you trying to make sense out of things. Yeah, really.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Wow, that's very, very cool and very interesting as well. So, obviously you are collecting mints and, I'm assuming, well, I don't know, actually, like, I think probably a lot of people will go, okay, mint. Yeah, we've seen a few different varieties in the garden centres. We've seen maybe apple mint, spearmint, a few things like that. But actually, how many species are there of mint? And within those species then, does anybody know how many varieties or potential varieties there are?
Right. That's a good question. So it's a massive matter of debate with mint for a number of reasons. It's I mean, I don't know if you know the mythology of it, which I find fascinating as well, but it's a really promiscuous plant, as you probably know. But the mythology is actually, cause she was a nymph mentha originally, and she too was promiscuous. That's why she got turned into a plant. I think it was Pluto's wife that turned the nymph into the plant that we tread on. And then Pluto, in his sort of kind-heartedness, because he felt sorry for his lover, he gave her a sweet scent, which is the thing. But I'm waffling now about something completely nothing to do with the question you asked me. But yeah, so it's a matter. The thing is, it is a matter of debate. There's the people I've spoken to that are also quite sort of expert in the field, I reckon there's about 250 plus types of mint. Species wise, it looks like there's about 25, something around that number of actual species. But then there's such little research, like genomic sequencing and stuff on this particular sort of family. It's not. We don't really know. Is the real answer. We know there's a lot, and there's definitely. I mean, I've got 18, I think, possibly got 20 at the end of this summer if I manage to keep 2 Australian ones alive. But they're not looking too great at the moment. But so I've got 20 of, but there's a lot of confusion around certain types as well, whether they've been misnamed or whether they've actually got it's just like a cultivar of the same species, that sort of thing, but yeah, so there's about 25 species. I'd say there's probably about the same number of subspecies. In terms of forms and varieties, probably about another 40. And then in terms of cultivars, you're looking at about 200. I reckon 250 is probably outright, to be honest. I've not. Yeah, but then you see, as I say, it's difficult because I've definitely had one cultivar which I'm fairly convinced is the same as another, and it's difficult to know for definite without doing some kind of scientific investigation into it. And also you do get sort of the commercial growers will sometimes name things out of desire to flog them when they're actually, so for example, there's an orange mint, for example, but then you'll find versions of which are called like Granada orange, or there's like a tangerine, and and sometimes I look at those and I think, well, they look very similar to me. They don't look like that there's that much difference going. So it's a long story, but the short answer is we don't really know. No. I've got 184 in the collection at the moment.
Wow.
186 if the 2 Australian ones survive. But we'll see.
That's incredible. And so are you doing anything in terms of breeding them?
Not at the moment. No, I mean, that's this is what my big goal is, to be honest. I'd love to. There was a guy in Canada who Jim, I've forgotten his surname now. Is it Westfield, something like that? Jim, I've forgotten his surname. But he was breeding in the 70s and 80s. I think maybe even earlier actually. He's probably the biggest, most famous of all the breeders internationally in mentha and I think he brought about 20 new varieties or something like that to the market. You can't really get many of them over here. Jessica's Sweet Lemon, Julia's Sweet Citrus, that's it, Hillary's Sweet Lemon. They're 3 that are sort of available in this country that are all Jim Westerfield types. I'd love to do it, but as I say, the problem is because they are so promiscuous as well. I mean, any of them will pollinate with others. They'll cross and hybridize really, really, really easily. So you can't really grow them from seed, if you see what I mean. You can't, to be sure, you'd have to do it in a very sort of rigid environment and make sure, you're doing your whole, paintbrush jobby to make sure you're getting them. And then probably root division from there onwards, because it's so that they really will, they'll cross really. I mean, even like the most common ones we know of, are actually hybrids as well. Like is it? I always get confuddled as whether it's peppermint or spearmint, but that's even a hybrid. Between is it peppermint? I think it's peppermint. I'm getting which confuddled now. I think it's peppermint. Is a hybrid of water mint and spearmint.
Oh,
or was it the other way around? I can't remember. But yeah, they'll and they're different species. So you get, the parentage could be crazy sometimes. So you get things that have like three or four different parents just to one plant sort of thing. Absolutely crazy.
Well, thinking about that sort of, I know it's not the same at all, but it's on a similar sort of line. I did hear that if you put mints of different types in a container together, they will all end up smelling the same. Is that true, or is that an old wives' tale?
I don't believe that at all. No, I don't. I mean, I've seen it as well. A lot of the really big names in gardening talk about that as well. It's not been my experience of it. Of grown, because I mean mine are all grown in 5-litre pots, and because I wouldn't put them, definitely wouldn't put them in the ground, because they grow like crazy, don't they? But and they're all next to each other as well, because it's a national plant collection. I've got to have 3 of each type as well. So even though I've got 184 plants, different types of plant, I've got to have 3 of those as well. So I'm near, it's near like 600 plants really, in the actual nursery, and they're all together, with the exception of the water mints, and some of the penny royals that are quite sort of boggy condition loving. They're all in 5-litre, and they're all, as I say, in lines, all right next to each other, but they don't really seem to take on any kind of characteristics or qualities of one another at all. They, if you rub an eau de cologne mint and it's sat next to the strawberry mint, you can still, they're still completely identifiably different. It's not. I mean, I suppose, if you walk past them all, you just get a general mintiness. Yeah. but like, I don't know how they would take. That's the thing, is I don't know how they would change either, because the reason they smell the way they do is because of the chemical composition of them. Of the essential oils. That's when certain mints have got more. I don't know. Like the citrus varieties, for example, they've got quite a lot of carvone and limonene in them as compounds, and that's what makes them smell citrusy. Whereas I'm trying to think of a different example. Well, other species have got higher menthol content, for example, so they smell they are different because they smell different because they've got a different essential oil composition. So I don't know how, and I'm surely that, I don't know, I reckon that must be a genetic thing. I can't see how it would change, if you know what I mean, just by sitting next to one another. No. So I don't know. The answer is, I'm not a scientist. I don't want to go, yes, definitely not. But in my experience, that's not been something that I've come across. Them sort of merging sort of thing. It's funny that it exists, though, isn't it? Where's that come? I wonder where it's come from. I wonder why that's a thing.
Probably one person said it once, just completely, either as a wind-up or thought they knew. Yeah. And then everyone else just repeated it because it sounded good, and the person who said it was probably quite important. So that's how these things usually start.
A little bit of folklore. That's the thing. There's loads of folklore about mint as well. So it's probably, you're probably right. That's what it is. I bet you're right.
Talking about like growing them in pots, though, I mean, I grow mint in pots and it just kind of ends up circling the edge of the pot. It's clearly not happy. It's probably hungry. What is the best way to have them in cultivation if you've got, obviously, like you said, you want to keep them in pots? What's the best thing to do with them to ensure that they're kind of happy year on year?
Yeah, they need dividing really, because you're right, they'll just go absolutely, the stolons, the roots, they'll just all go around the edge of the pot, and actually you can lose them as well if you don't divide them, because the frost, of course, can get to if you, especially if you live in cold climates, it'll get, if the all the sort of the roots and the stolons of the plant are on the outside, touching the pot on the outside, then they're going to, they're more prone to getting the cold at them. So, yeah, I do. What I always do is it's hard to explain just by talking. I can normally show people so if I got, I'd get the plant out of the pot, and then I'd put the spade kind of, not all, no, I wouldn't cut it in half, but like kind of cut it like 2/3 in half, if you see what I mean. So it looks like if you were to hold it up, you could make like a Pac-Man face with it,
Yep.
If that makes
Yeah, I've got you.
Analogy, but yeah, and then you turn it in on itself. So you turn it, so as if you're opening the Pac-Man's mouth all the way around. That's a gross metaphor, image, isn't it? But that means you've got the roots all in the centre again, and then pop it back in the pot, and it'll do you another year or two then, until it grows really big, and then you definitely just have to divide them, because they'll just keep going, won't they? They're such a because of the rhizomatous, or whatever, however you say that word, they're rhizomes, aren't they? So they'll just grow and grow and grow and grow, really. Well, I say that, not all of them will, but a lot of them do. And it's a perennial herbaceous, so it'll keep coming back unless it does get pot bound, or the cold gets at it, and then So I think that first, I mean, to be honest, I don't really have that problem though, because I'm flogging little bits of it as well. I tend, and that it tends to be root divisions or propagated cuttings that I'm selling, to keep the collection going. So, they don't often. There's a couple of species that are so prolific that I do have to actually, divide them, sort of thing, properly. But most of them, just because I'm taking off little bits now and then, they don't tend to get too crazy. But there are some like there's a type called Tashkent, allegedly Delia Smith's favourite. I don't know if that's true, but it's allegedly. Tashkent's it's from the foothills of the Himalayas. Actually, it's from Uzbekistan originally, but it is unbelievably prolific. Honestly, it will just grow and grow. It's crazy how give it 4 years in the ground and it will cover like 3 or 4 meters square easily, and it'll go about 1 meter tall easily. It's a really, really sort of. I'll never, honestly, and foolishly, that's the first one I put in the ground as well. That's how I know I grow. But if you put even a pot within a year of a 5 litre pot, that will have completely filled the pot.
Obviously, you're growing them all together as well. The other part of that question that I had is, are there any pests and diseases that you need to look out for? I mean, obviously, you would know because you're growing them as a monoculture, really, kind of in your group. Is there anything they're particularly susceptible to?
Yeah, I mean, there are. There's the two I've come across which are a bit of a nuisance. I mean, I want to say that though, they're not like. It's a really, I think, as a plant, as a genus even, it's pretty hardy, really. But I mean, mine they do get a bit of powdery mildew. On a couple of them do. But I think that's just an aeration issue, really, though, because they grow them all together. They just need a little bit more space, I think, sometimes where I am. But yeah, there's a fungi, Puccinium menthe, which is like a rust, basically. There's a leaf spot, and I think there's a wilt, there's a stem rot. There's all the usual kind of things you expect, but they're not very. I've never come across any of those particularly. And actually, as long as you cut them, once they've died back in the autumn, as long as you cut them back to, like a couple of inches from the ground, it tends to get rid of it anyway, really. But as I say, I've only ever had a bit of powdery mildew, and I managed to clear it up quite easily just by moving a few of the pots and letting them get a bit of air. But in terms of pests, I did have a bit of a panic last year, actually, because I thought I'd found one. It's a beetle, the mint beetle. Beautiful little thing, actually. It's I don't know how about sort of I wouldn't even say it's a centimetre. It's about
ladybird size, would you say?
Yeah. So that's good. Yeah, that's a good size. Yeah, about a ladybird size, maybe a bit smaller actually. Was it? Oh, hang on. No. Sorry, I'm drawing a ladybird now just to see. To see. Yeah, I think it's about ladybird size. Yeah, and a very sort of beautiful metallic sort of blue colour to it. And it's gorgeous. It really is a lovely looking beetle. But obviously, I got a bit panicky because the last thing I need is like an infestation of them. That really would ruin things. But look, I got it. I really like a great lass from Bedford came out and she took it away to examine it, and actually it turned out to be an ash beetle, the one I had, and they're really, really similar. They're like really quite difficult to differentiate. That's the only one that I keep getting scared about pest wise. And there are, I believe, there's a new pest, European. It's a European mint beetle, which is a greenier, like a green metallic, as opposed to the sort of blue metallic that we've got on the islands. So yeah, I think that I don't know, but I think that one's a bit more. What's the word? Voracious. Has a bit of a bigger appetite as well than the indigenous blue one, but yeah, I've not, luckily, touch wood, I've not had any of them arrive yet.
No, well, funny enough, I've got a patch of mint which is actually in the ground, but it's in a contained bed, and that had them on it last year. The mint beetle.
Oh right, the blue one.
Yeah, and it was very pretty. Although that said, we are quite near an ash tree, so I suppose it could have been that, but it was on the mint, and
yeah, well that was fine. Yeah, mine was on the mint as well. That's what panicked me, if I'm honest. But I don't know. I guess they can nibble other things. Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you. Come on.
No, I was going to say that the mint didn't seem unduly worried. So I kind of I did panic at first, and then I thought, no, I'll let it be fine, and then I just left it, and it was all fine. So fingers crossed.
I do get the only other thing I do get is I'll get a little bit of green fly sometimes. On certain types, because obviously a lot of species are quite hairy, and that tends to deter the green fly. But there are some that it's like the desert mints, for example. They don't really have hairs at all, and are quite and you have to kind of keep them indoors over winter as well, because they won't suffer the English climate. So they do tend to get a little bit of green fly on them sometimes. But same old as anything really, just bit washing up liquid, they're off. But but again, they don't really. As I say, it's such a hardy, family of plants. It just tends to sort of just shake things off. Really, touch wood. I've not had anything yet that's been dramatically problematic. We had a really hard winter a few years back, and that was they were absolutely fine. They didn't seem to touch them really.
Brilliant.
I thought I'd lose. I think I lost one plant that year, which was lahij, which is from forgetting Azerbaijan, and that's the only one that I lost to a cold winter. I mean, if I'd left the desert mints out, they'd have gone, but they were all tucked up in the conservatory.
Yeah. Very sensible. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, you couldn't have picked a better collection in terms of hardiness, because they just go on and on and on, and are seemingly bomb-proof. I mean, I should have known, actually, when you said about coming from a foodie background, I should have guessed that you did, because I did go on your website and I spent a long time on there looking at all the various types of mints that you've got for sale. And I love the mint collections. I am going to get one, at least one, but but I can't.
I need to.
That's a problem because they're all.
Oh, that's good to know. It's good to know you're spoiled for choice.
I know, I really am, and they're so cleverly put together, and that's where obviously your background comes into play. So I suppose my final question is: could you talk about maybe one or two of your mint collections and kind of the thinking behind it? And did you also personally research all of these things as well?
Right. Okay. Yeah. So the research side of it is something I'm really interested in, and yeah, that's really everything that's on. I mean, I've got this thing on the website. I'm trying to create like a bit of an encyclopedia. So I've called it a Mintopia, I think it is actually. Yeah, I'm trying to collect as much information about each of the types that I've got. And incidentally, if any of your listeners have got any information at all about mint whatsoever, whether that's, I don't know, some kind of folkloric thing or a bit of specific knowledge, or indeed if they know of a particular or unusual mint, please get in touch, because I'm just trying to find out as much as I can about it, about all different types. So yeah, so I'm trying to find out as much as I can, read and do the research, and that's, I think, I feel like it's part of the mission really of the plant collection, because it's about sustainability really more than anything, and trying to understand things, I think, helps us to be able to protect them a little bit really. But yeah, the website itself, that was I put it together around collections because I just thought, it was like how you started the conversation before, actually. People often just think, oh, mint, oh, what, there's that many? I always get that when I have a chat to people about it. They're like, well, I thought there's only like 2 or 3 types, And I thought, well, no, how do we engage people with this sort of idea that there are lots of different types? And actually, if you get different, more unusual ones for your garden, you're actually contributing to biodiversity and, or at least maintaining biodiversity. So I wanted to try and find ways of putting unusual mints together so that people weren't just tempted just to buy the ones that they knew of. So I decided to put little collections together, and they were based around the different ways that mint can be used, because there are certain mints that are very particular to certain, I don't know, traditions or particular cuisines, for example. So one example, so if I give you an example, right, so there's like a beverage collection, for example, and that's split into 2 different types. There's teas, so there's like a tea collection, and then there's I think it's the tipple collection. And you know what? I'm really bad because it's been ages since it's been on the website. I need to update it clearly. I can't even remember it. Nowadays, I just tend to get an order and I'm like, panic, get it out quick.
You get an order through and you're like, oh my God, what did I put in the tipple collection?
Yeah, exactly. What's the tipple? What is the tipple collection? I forgot. But as an example, so you've got something like Mentha requienii, which is Corsican mint. Tiny little leaves. It's a ground covering thing. Really unusual. In terms of what it looks like, compared to other species, but it's but that's what they make creme de menthe out of, for example. So that's quite a well-known liqueur, isn't it? Spirit, but it's Corsican mint that it's traditionally made out of. Whereas, and then you've got things like mojitos, for example. That's a cracking one. So the mojito mint is actually a very, very particular type of mint. It's not, a lot of the time, when people make a mojito, they'll just chuck any old spearmint or peppermint in, won't they? But actually, mojito mint is very unusual. It's very, very unusual in terms of its fragrance. It's quite hairy as well, which is quite unusual. It's quite a strange thing to put in your drink, but it has a really sort of smoky, kind of musky edge to it, which a lot of the mints don't have. But when you put it in the mojito, you recognise straight away. Well, at least I feel like I do. I'm like, oh yes, that's the flavour that I was after to make my mojito proper. So it's things like that. So the collections, they or it might be a Kentucky Kernel mint, which is really well known in the States for making mint julep. That's a drink that's drunk at horse racing meets, for example. So there's a whole, there's so many, and just in the cocktail world, different types of mints that are specific specifically grown and added to very specific cocktails. And then you've got all the various tea traditions I mentioned, this is just in the beverages section, So in the teas, you've got there's like Japanese mint is just, for mint tea, I couldn't personally recommend a better tea than a Japanese mint. It's just gorgeous. It's so subtle in its flavors. It's really complex at the same time. You just get so many different flavors from it. It's really unusual. But then you've got things like Moroccan teas, for example, which are, again, a very, very ancient tradition of tea drinking. And there's very particular mints that you can associate with that as well. So there's like Atlas Mountains mint, for example, which is used in the sort of tea ceremonies there. There's honestly, and as I say, that's just beverages, and then cuisine wise, I've split it into two different collections, which is more sort of like just general culinary chefing type mints, and then sweet toothed mints, so mints that you might find in desserts or puddings and sweets, of course. Kendal mint cake, for example. Although you do need that's supposed to be in oil though, really, rather than fresh mint. And there's so many cuisines around the world that use mint in different ways as well. Like Southeast Asian cuisine uses mint quite a lot, which folks don't always recognise. And you've got obviously all the Middle Eastern dishes, like just tabbouleh for it's a sort of standard thing, isn't it? And even our sort of like traditional, lamb and mint sauce. You could choose. There is actually a mint called English lamb, and it does go exceptionally well as a mint sauce. I must say. But then actually the way that it's used is because in mint sauce you've got that sort of that acid that cuts through the fat of the meat, and then the mint just gives it that really just takes the edge off it for when you're actually eating it. Though it's like you can actually use it in all sorts. So I often, when I go out on and do like plant fairs or shows and things like that, I'll often team up with a chef friend, and he runs like a chef business where he goes out and he does like barbecues for people and things like that, goes to people's houses and does catering. But we'll set up stalls next to each other, and he'll do mint dishes with the mints that I'm selling on my stall, sort of thing. So we sort of team up. But he did this honestly, it was a beautiful sort of. What was it? I think it was just some sort of beef dish, but it was basically like a mint sauce, but he spiced. I think he'd put a bit of chili in it or something like that as well. But oh my word, it was lovely, and it was just as good as your more traditional lamb and mint sort of thing. But it just had a little bit of something a bit different about it. But the function of it was the same. It was to cut through. The acid was cutting through the fat. And then you were getting this flavour of the mint, the sweetness of the mint, which kind of rounds it all off a little bit. It's just funny talking about me because I don't hardly eat it anymore. But I'm pretty much vegan nowadays. But
yeah, me too. But
it's used also. I mean, the best thing about having so much mint in the garden as well is it benefits from being cut. It grows back stronger and more what's the word I'm looking for? It's fuller, isn't it? When you prune it a little. And so we constantly we do a lovely vegan meatball using mint as well. And you can use a whole plant basically of mint, and it will feed us for about 3 or 4 days. The amount what we can make out of it is cracking. I'm trying to think what were the other collections. That's what you asked me. So I went off on a ramble, didn't I?
No, it's fantastic. No, I was just going to get you to give like 1 or 2 as an example to kind of whet people's appetites, which I think you have very much done. I'm sure. I hope everyone's going to go flocking to your website because, like I said, the same.
Oh, that'd be great.
And I hope you look at the Mintopia website. And also, Si has an open day on June the 11th, so do check that out too. I absolutely love speaking to Si. He's really found something that absorbs and fascinates him. And what a winning plant group he's chosen with the multifaceted mint. His passion and excitement is obvious, and my parting wish for you at the end of this episode is, may you find your mint. Thank you to friend of the show, Jake Rayson, for suggesting Si as a guest, and thanks to you for listening. Now, given the state of the world at the moment, here's Dr. Ian Bedford with the only thing left for us in the cosmos's arsenal.
Here in Britain, we should all be familiar with seeing an occasional swarm of insects, whether it be the annual spectacle of new reproductive ants leaving nests to undertake their nuptial flights, or a breakaway group of honeybees following a new queen as she makes her bid for freedom from the hive. But one we won't be seeing here is a swarm of insects that had threatened to decimate swathes of wild and cultivated vegetation, as sometimes happens within tropical parts of the world with locusts. Locust is the name that's given to a group of grasshopper species that, unlike our native grasshoppers, radically change their behaviour in response to environmental stimuli. In particular, the volatiles released from fresh new plant growth that occurs after a long period of drought. Before these natural signals, the locusts will have lived solitary lives, but they now start gathering together in large groups that breed abundantly and migrate en masse in search of food. And as young flightless locusts increasingly hatch from eggs, they create living blankets, smothering the ground and consuming every scrap of foliage that they pass over, until they mature into winged adult locusts that take to the air to form a dense, fast-moving swarm that'll travel great distances in its quest to find new feeding sites. Every so often, though, the individual swarms, which can comprise of many billions of locusts, will merge to form plagues of many trillions. Plagues whose dire effects on civilizations have been chronicled throughout the tropical and subtropical regions since prehistory. Despite locust swarms remaining a threat to crops in many countries nowadays, their overall impact has declined, since we now understand a lot more about the locust biology and the environmental triggers they respond to. And so their behaviour and the locations where swarms are known to start are regularly monitored, so that control measures can be put into practice as and when required. However, this inevitably results in widespread use of pesticides that have detrimental effects on the surrounding environment. So what perhaps could modern-day science offer as environmentally safer alternatives for the future control of locusts? Well, research is certainly ongoing, and already a naturally occurring fungus called metarhizium has been discovered that kills locusts within a week or two when they're exposed to its spores. And a unique pheromone that locusts use to incite congregation has also been identified, which could perhaps be used as an attractant for large-scale trapping. But whatever new methods are found, they're unlikely to equal the often lethal effect on a species when its specialist habitat is lost, which was the likely reason for the demise of the Rocky Mountain locust, when large-scale agriculture dramatically changed the foothill prairies of Montana. The locust's only known habitat, where in 1887 it had produced a swarm almost 2,000 miles long, 100 miles wide and 1 mile deep, a locust that just 30 years later would never be seen on the planet again.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a Gofundme where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or Gofundme and search for Roots and All Podcast.